only 3 games in. This just shows you how much pressure there is in the NFL, the NBA, the NHL, you name it. But if you start off and things aren't going well, the seat starts to get a little bit warm, a little bit hotter, and a little bit hotter. There's a hot seat out there right now because the Cincinnati Bengals were expected to be not only a playoff team, maybe, one of the toughest teams in the division that they play in. All of the different storylines you've got there. You've got Joe Burrow. He's got a pretty nice, healthy contract. He's averaging $55 million per year right now, the number 2 paid quarterback. How do they come up with these numbers? Because a lot of them, by the way, Trevor Lawrence, he's making $55 million as well. But he doesn't have as much guarantee as Burrow does, so Burrow moves up on the chain a little bit higher. So he's number 2. Trevor's number 4. Here's the problem, Mark. Both of these quarterbacks are playing okay, maybe at best. I mean, they're not terrible, but they're playing okay, and the teams themselves are both kicking off at 0-3. Now, when you pay your quarterback the kind of money that you are in both cases here, suddenly you've got to point the finger somewhere. How can you possibly be 0-3? Well, I think right now Zac Taylor is sitting there in Cincinnati thinking, you know what? If I can't get something out of the next 3 or 4 games, I might be out before Thanksgiving. I mean, there could be real problems there. And I look at Trevor Lawrence and I take a look at his coach, Doug Pederson. Yes, these guys he's been to a Super Bowl, obviously. He's done a really good job as a quarterback whisperer type coach or whatever. He's a former quarterback, Green Bay Packers. But it just makes you wonder. They've got all this money tied up in just these quarterbacks. And if you start off 0-3 and you are not clicking, Mark, that's a huge problem. And it's amazing how in the NFL, they don't have any patience at all. And I think that their patients are already starting to not feel like it's going to be all that great. And the seat is getting pretty damn hot for those 2 teams.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's no different from a CEO, right? You make a significant allocation of capital, a significant investment in a business expansion, a marketing campaign, whatever it may be. And if it doesn't provide a return on capital, your investors, in this case, your fans and the sports media, turn to you and say, WTF. But I do have a question, though, Pete. Is part of the reason for this the underutilization of quarterbacks in the NFL? Is part of the reason for this the kid gloves with which these guys are being handled? Do the coaches just get more aggressive and say, I'm willing to risk injury, I'm willing to take more risks, with these divas of the football field, and try to get more out of that investment? Or what's the play when you're facing this kind of a situation?
I can give you a really good answer. In general, in my opinion, I look at the teams that have some of the highest paid quarterbacks, right? Mm-hmm. Look at the Cleveland Browns. They're struggling. Take a look at these 2 teams. Obviously, Cincinnati Bengals, big time struggling. Jacksonville struggling. Why are so many of these teams struggling that have paid out? Dallas Cowboys right now, right? I mean, the Dallas Cowboys were supposed to be one of the best teams in football. They gave Dak Prescott all of this money and everything else. I'll tell you what, Mark, when you pay one guy $55+ million a year, how much does that go into a cap that's $255 million? Well, suddenly you've got one player getting a huge percentage. Right. You can only pay so many guys because otherwise you've got problems with the cap. So I think that is part of it, to be honest with you, is how much money is devoted to, first of all, a quarterback. Second of all, almost every one of those teams that I just mentioned. How about the wide receivers? I mean, we know what JJ's getting. We know what CeeDee Lamb is getting. All of these various receivers are getting these ungodly contracts for, call it, anywhere between $30 and $40 million. Well, all of a sudden you've got 2 players that take up, almost 50%, a little less than 50, but 40% of the salary cap for 2 guys? Really?
Is the move then to try to get more utilization out of them, to put them on the field more? Is that what you do in this situation?
If you can, I suppose that would be the way to do it. But I think the real problem is the NFL's got to start figuring out, all right, how do we work this so these teams don't collapse based upon 1 player or 2 players, maybe 3 players. It's just too difficult because then you can't pay the offensive lineman. You can't pay the defensive lineman. And they're as important, quite frankly, in a lot of ways, as almost as much as these quarterbacks and receivers. Matter of fact, I've been out on record saying I wouldn't pay my receivers that much money because quite frankly, the difference between the number one receiver in the NFL right now, a guy like Jefferson with the Vikings, you look down about number 20, how different are they? Really not as much difference as people sort of think. So I think that's part of the problem too, is how they distribute the money. Next up, I'm going right back to the quarterbacks, but I'm going to one. The Washington Commanders, Mark. Tell you what, Jayden Daniels won the Heisman Trophy last year. He was not the first pick in the draft, though. Everybody was talking about this is a draft filled with 6 quarterbacks going in the top 20, right? I mean, absolutely crazy this year how they went nuts about what they were doing on the draft. But Jayden Daniels played at LSU. All he did was, well, he did okay. He had a 72% completion rate. He threw, incredible 89 touchdowns and 20 interceptions. I mean, this guy really was absolutely magnificent as a player. I mean, just absolutely magnificent. Well, he's come into the NFL. Suddenly, the Washington Commanders look like a team that might be more than just, everybody's off week, because now all of a sudden they got a quarterback he's got records going on right now. He's 80% completions in the first 3 games, Mark. So in game just last night, 91%. He was 21 of 23 last night, couple of touchdowns. Now he's only thrown a couple touchdowns. Against Tampa, 71% completion. Against the Giants, 79% completion. There is something to be said about what this guy's doing with this team, how he's throwing the ball, how he's manning the offense. And this is a rookie. He was taken second in the NFL draft. I think this guy's pretty special. I said that. I thought he was the best quarterback going into the draft. And as of right now, he's making me look pretty good on this. But, it's a long season. Caleb Williams will get better. All these guys will get better. Bo Nix will get better. But I'll tell you what, Jayden Daniels right now has Washington actually somewhat relevant for a team that was viewed as irrelevant.
Yeah, it's been a pretty cool story to watch. It's also why those Heisman Awards and who gets picked, certainly who wins, but even the guys that get nominated, so important and such an important window into talent and the pros going forward. Pete, with that, we wrap sports, and just real quick, shameless plug. We are less than 3 weeks away from our Market Rebellion Rebel Mastermind event on October 11th.